This is Robert Chadwick with American Mortgages. Thanks for joining us for our most recent webinar. I think everybody will find this webinar to be incredibly exciting because it's been asked to be shown or performed many times over the past. So happy to say that we've been invited George Gainey, who is the founding partner of the Gainey Law Group, which is a Washington, D.C. based law firm that focuses on private client immigration matters. He's a passionate advocate for his clients and a significant experience advising both individuals and businesses on the types of immigration into the U.S., including EB-5, E-2, L-1A petitions, etc. George's firm is very robust in the EB-5 arena, and I think I'll let him explain a little bit more. But how this webinar will go is George will explain his company and what exactly they are doing and how it can help our American Mortgages clients. And then we'll cover a little bit about the mortgages as usual, and then we'll have a very interactive live question and answer session at the very end. So George, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. I know you're on holiday in Spain right now, so I appreciate your time. Perhaps maybe you can introduce your company a little bit more and tell us what you are specializing in, and then we'll go through the slides.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert. Pleasure to be here. Happy to join. So I'm the founding partner of a law firm that has my name, and it's exactly what you think of when you think of a law firm. A bunch of people, computers, lots of paper, lots of books, lots of printers, and we're representing clients in U.S. immigration matters. So our clients tend to be individuals and their family members who are interested in finding some type of U.S. immigration option, whether that's over the short, medium, or long term. So that's what we do. We are verified by a couple of well thought of EB-5 publications and organizations. Just because of the nature of our client base, we do tend to do a lot of EB-5 work, but as you said in the intro, we mostly focus on private client matters, which means that it really runs the gamut. Anything from a tourist visa that's been denied or revoked, all the way up to EB-5 filings or L-1A filings, E-2 visa filings, etc. So we're a good team, and we really like representing our clients. We travel very frequently, so Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, and then Latin America, a couple times a year.
Perfect. So what I'll do is I'll start the slides, and then you can go into the presentation from there.
Great.
Are you able to see the slides?
Yeah, I can see the cover sheet. Yeah, there we go. Great. So today we're going to sort of try to cover a lot of ground and give a high-level overview of the U.S., some parts of the U.S. immigration system. U.S. immigration law is extremely complicated. There's lots and lots of different visa options that, again, range from very simple sort of tourist visa options all the way to things like complicated political asylum or refugee claims. So today we're just going to try to focus on standard U.S. visa options, both non-immigrant, which means just a visa in your passport, and immigrant, which means green card. So we'll run through L-1A visa and green card counterpart, which is E-1C. We'll talk about E-2 visas, which are investment-based, EB-5, which is the green card investment-based option. And then at the end, we'll talk about F-1 visas, student visas. And, we've seen a lot of interest in O-1 visas, so we'll touch on those very briefly as well. In the next slide there. So again, business immigration visas, talk about L-1s, EB-1C, investment-based, E-2, EB-5, and then mixed bag, student, and O-1 visas. L-1s, here we go. Okay, so an L1 visa, just broad strokes, if you think about Amazon or Coca-Cola or any very large multinational, this is the visa that those companies use to transfer executives and managers from abroad to the United States. So it requires a multinational relationship between two different corporate entities, both inside and outside the US. It requires an individual to have at least 1 year of experience as an executive or manager outside the US at the related entity. And it requires them to have an executive or managerial role inside the US waiting for them. So typically for our individual clients, we see this in the context of a closely held family business where an individual is either the founder or a CEO, or maybe it's a younger family member who, is sort of coming up the ranks and they have an executive position outside the US. And now they would like to go to the US either to start a new venture there or to work for a related company that already exists inside the US. Benefits of this visa: it lasts 7 years. A spouse and child can also access a dependent visa, which is called an L2. A spouse can work, children can study. But the principal visa applicant can only work for the US entity. So if an individual wants a visa that sort of just gives them carte blanche and lets them, work wherever they want, spend as much time in the US as they want, travel in and out, might not be the best visa, but it's a very, very useful visa. And it has a green card counterpart, which we'll see on this next slide here. So this is the EB1C, and in the immigration statute, the wording that corresponds to the L1 visa and the wording that corresponds to the EB1C is almost identical. So if an individual comes to the US with an L1 visa, they can opt for a green card through something called an EB1C visa petition. So a lot of times clients will say, hey, I want to go to the US. I want to see how it goes, have my kids go to school there. Maybe we'll buy a place, maybe we'll rent for a couple of years. And then they come back to us and they say, okay, I know you mentioned that we could do a green card filing. We want to start that process. And it's a sort of seamless jump from the L1 to the green card, just because the requirements are substantially similar. Okay, so these are interesting investment-based visa options. One is called an E2, and another is called EB5. An E2 is only available to citizens of certain countries. And that's because it's a treaty-based visa. So many different countries will have a treaty, an international trade or commerce treaty with the United States. And a provision of that treaty will provide U.S. citizen investor visas in the non-U.S. country. And that non-U.S. country citizen investor access to investor visas in the United States. So for that reason, it's limited to only a certain number of countries. Most of Western Europe, most of Latin America, some countries in Asia, but it's a case-by-case analysis. EB5 is available to anyone. So just take a step back. EB5 is a green card, and E2 is just a visa. It's renewable indefinitely, but it's not a green card. There's no permanence to it. You don't get on a path towards citizenship. That's something the client's interested in. Another big difference is for an E2 visa, the requirements are a little bit amorphous. There's no specific amount of money that an individual needs to invest. There's no specific number of employees that need to be hired or, jobs created. For EB5, it's very, very specific. In the statute, it says that the minimum investment amount is $800,000 and that 10 new full-time jobs need to be created. So those are two big differences between E2 and EB5. One is E2 is available to a limited number of countries, whereas EB5 is available to everyone. The other is E2, the investment amount and how many employees you need to create is kind of business driven. It depends on the business plan. Whereas EB5, it's written in the statute. We can go to the next slide here. So again, who can apply? Limited for E2, for EB5 with everyone. The other thing is speed. In EB5, we need to submit a visa petition to an entity called USCIS. So it's a US-based federal agency. For an E2 visa, we can go directly to a US embassy or consulate abroad. And so that means that we're not subject to the long wait times that exist because USCIS, has so much work and their wait times are at a historic high. So if an individual needs a US immigration option very quickly, and E2 is a good option, whereas EB5 is more of a longer term option that'll bear fruit in 2 to 3 years, and it'll be permanent. But in the interim, if you need to get to the US quickly, then it's not the greatest option. Next slide. So clients always ask, once we talk about immigration, the next question that comes up almost always is related to tax. Not a tax attorney, but I've been on enough calls to at least be able to give a general overview. So an E2 visa holder can limit exposure to taxation on their global income by not becoming a US resident for income tax purposes. Whereas if someone obtains a green card, you're per se a US resident, again, for income tax purposes. And so you're going to at least, without any planning, be subject to tax on your global income. And then, commitment terms. An E2 visa, you can, get rid of at the drop of the hat. You invest, into an operating business. That needs to remain in place so long as the visa is going to be renewed. And you do have to actually run the E2 business in some way, whereas EB5 is completely passive. And you just go to the next slide there. This is just the mechanics of an EB5 visa. It's probably useful to sit down and go through once you've read a little bit more about EB5. It just provides a general overview of how, the process of actually getting the visa works. 9 times out of 10 clients will invest passively, like I said before, into an entity that's sponsored by something called a regional center. That's a whole other 3-hour webinar, so we won't dive too deeply into what a regional center is, exactly how EB5 through a regional center works, but suffice to say that EB5 through a regional center, you don't have to go out and hire 10 people yourself. You make an investment into a fairly robust construction project, and the sponsor of that project, or at least the sponsor of a part of the capital stack for that project, which is called a regional center, takes care of ensuring that the jobs are created sufficient to lead to the issuance of your green card. Okay, so F1 student visas. There are hundreds of thousands of individuals in the U.S. on student visas. Very popular immigration option in the U.S. for lots of different reasons. It requires an individual to be enrolled as a full-time student in an academic educational program inside the U.S. There's lots of different programs and schools that are certified by something called the Student and Exchange Visitors Program, SEVP. Individual needs to be proficient in English, or at least be going to study English, have enough funds, and maintain a residence abroad. So because there are so many F1 student visas, essentially what the Department of State has done is they've outsourced the analysis of whether an individual meets the requirements for a student visa to schools and universities and educational centers that have a license effectively from the Department of State. And so what these schools will do if they're certified, they'll issue a form called an I-20. And so instead of going with a huge stack of application materials to a visa interview, you provide all of those materials to the school, and then the school issues you an I-20. And then you go and apply for your visa with your I-20 certified by the school. And that way the Department of State doesn't have to go through the process of certifying that, you're enrolled in the full term of the full course of study and you speak English and you have enough money to pay for it and all of those things. The school does that and then issues the certified I-20. And F1 can also lead to some employment. It has some conditions. It's called OPT. Clients call and ask about it all the time. Their children are in the U.S., they're finishing school, they're going to do OPT, maybe they don't have a job, they're looking for some kind of immigration option because OPT doesn't allow for long terms of employment. So it's something we deal with all the time. And then finally, I thought we'd just briefly touch on the O1 visa. The O1 visa is an interesting visa. It also offers a lot of flexibility in terms of acquiring the visa. We can be very creative with these. Sometimes clients think that, because they haven't won a gold medal or, gotten funding from some very highly regarded venture capital firm, they can't access an O1 visa, but that's not really true. We can be very, very creative with these. Essentially, it requires you to demonstrate that you've risen to the top of your field, whatever that field happens to be, whether you play the xylophone really well or you're a great downhill skier, whatever it is. And they're fun to work on because we have to gather lots of different types of documentation. One downside is that you can't self-petition. So you need a business or an entity in the U.S. to sponsor you. And then you can only work for that sponsor in the U.S. So even if you are, an artist who does exhibitions in the U.S. or whatever it is, you're tied to that sponsor, even though maybe you get paid directly. So that's just, sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable and difficult for clients to find a sponsor, but again, something we deal with all the time. The other thing is that dependent spouses can't work with an O2 visa, which is the dependent visa. So sometimes clients will want, their spouse to be able to work, but as a dependent on an O1 visa, that's not an option, unfortunately. And so I tried to keep it short and sweet there. I think I more or less did my job, as an attorney. My very deeply seated instinct is to talk for a very, very long period of time in lots of technical language. So I hope I didn't do that too badly today, but this is where we are. We're based in Washington, D.C. We're about a mile north of the White House. That doesn't mean that we can walk into the Oval Office and pick up a green card from Joe Biden's desk for clients, but being in D.C. does have its advantages in addition to it being a beautiful city. So thanks again, Robert. I hope that was helpful. The slides probably have a lot more detailed information that people can look through, and more than happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Yeah, that was great, George. Thanks. I have a few questions on just some of the things that you covered before I go into my presentation. But when you were talking about the the E2 visa and the EB5 visa, which one is easier to obtain, or actually of all the visas, for our clients abroad that may be looking to immigrate to the U.S., which is going to have the greatest amount of success?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. It depends a little bit on what the client wants to do. If you just want to get to the U.S. Quickly, without having to set anything up, without having to spend much money in a business or like in a business context, then the F1 is a classic way to get to the US very quickly. If you want to own and operate a business, I would say the E2 can be a good option if you're from a country that has a treaty with the United States, or an L1 if you're a business owner from outside the US and you want to set something up inside the US. The L1 and the E2 will be quick. The The F1 can also be quick depending on what time of year you're enrolling. EB5 is a much longer term option. It's going to bear fruit over 2 to 3 years. That's when it'll start. You'll start seeing the upside of it. But the benefit of EB5 is that it's totally passive. So the hard part is getting the $800,000, finding a good project to invest into. But once you do that, you don't really have to do anything else. You don't have to open a business. You don't have to hire. It's all outsourced. The passive investment. So really, it just depends on the goals of the client and their timeline.
And when you just stated depends on the time of the year that you apply. When is the best time of the year to apply for a visa?
Oh, I was just talking about F1. So if you want to go get an MBA, you can only.
Oh, understand.
There's two times essentially you can start. Okay. If you're applying for a visa, it doesn't. It depends on what country you're from. So if you're applying in, say, August or September in India, that's going to be when a lot of H-1B applicants will also be applying. So things can get a little bit crazy then. And it also depends on what consulate. It's more not so much time of year, but what consulate you're going to go have your visa interview in. And that's because some consulates are considered hardship posts. Others are considered very sort of like desirable posts for these consular officers who are working for the Department of State. So if you can ever get a visa interview in, Rome or Lisbon or some sort of quieter Western Europe type location, that's going to be a lot better than say, a much higher volume, more intense consulate in China or India.
I understand. Okay. All right, great. So I'll start my presentation, and then following that, looks like we already have quite a few questions regarding the EB5s or the other visas that are offering, and then we'll go through the questions and answer together. I'll read off the question, and then we can decide who's going to answer that. So, okay. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining. As I mentioned, I will quickly go over the loan programs that America Mortgages has for both clients that are looking at the visa options and generally investing in U.S. real estate. So again, as a company, 100% of our clients are living and working abroad, obtaining a U.S. mortgage. So this is all we do. And frankly, I truly believe that nobody does this better. Our general mortgage overview, no U.S. credit is required. In lieu of U.S. credit, we can take your credit from your home country. There's never any AUM, meaning that you do not need to fund a bank account with the mortgage provider or the lender that will be providing the loan. Foreign income is always allowed. I mean, it's expected with our loans. We have loan programs in all 50 states. And if you're a foreign national, we can get up to 75% financing. If you're a US expat and still maintain US credit, we can get up to 80%. That's both for purchases and equity releases. Normally, once you submit all of your documents, we can get you a loan approval in 72 hours. And the average closing time, depending on how you sign, the closing documents is average between 30 to 45 days. And you can sign your closing documents without having traveled to the US in most major countries in a variety of ways, at least 4 different ways, depending on the lender and the state that the property is located in. Again, we do loans for purchases, refinances, and equity release. One thing that is very unique to the US is there are no age restrictions for a 30-year fixed mortgage. So regardless if you are 19 or 99, you can still qualify for a 30-year mortgage. As a matter of fact, we even have a 40-year mortgage, which is a, which is a fixed 10-year interest only, where you're servicing only the interest for the first 10-year period at a fixed rate. After that 10 years, the rate does not adjust, which is absolutely fantastic on these loans. it just turns into a principal and interest loan. So you have a total tenure of 40 years. And if you're looking to maximize yield, especially when interest rates are a little bit higher than what they maybe have been the last few years, this is a perfect program. We also have loans with common sense underwriting. Just like a commercial loan, these are underwritten on the cash flow of the property only, meaning that you do not need to provide any personal income documents. Perfect for somebody that's self-employed or maybe just doesn't show their true serviceability. One thing that we're very proud of is 97% of the loan applications we submit get approved. If they're not approved, it's normally something property related and actually not borrower related. We have loan officers now in 12 different countries, speak a variety of language. And the most important thing is, besides the fact it's 24/7 service, we speak your language in your time zone. No longer will you have to stay up at 3 and 4 in the morning to talk to somebody in New York and explain why Hong Kong doesn't have a zip code or whatever it may be. So our loan programs, I will cover them quite quickly. We have the AM Express Plus. This is our most popular loan program. This loan is qualified only on the cash flow of the property. And if you think about it, these are commercial investments, and this is actually how these properties should qualify, where when we get the appraisal, we actually request a rental analysis, and we use that rental analysis as the income to qualify for the loan. So it's quite straightforward, very simple. Loan amounts as low as $150,000. Maximum is $3 million on this loan. No U.S. credit is required. No deposit is required. And the average closing time is 30 to 45 days. An example of how this works, excuse me, if you were to take the gross rental income from the appraisal, say it's $2,400, and then we take the total mortgage payment, which would include the principal, the interest, the tax, and insurance, that is $2,400. The loan qualifies. Now, it doesn't mean that if for some reason the income doesn't meet the actual mortgage payment, that the loan is not approved. What it actually would mean would be the loan to value might be reduced. So it may require you to put a little bit more money down if it's not cash flowing the way we would like, but the loan still will normally get approved, and we can use 100% of the rent to cover whatever the mortgage payment is. Next program is another quite popular program. What makes this unique is because we're doing loans for clients all around the world, it would be very difficult to go through all of these tax returns in a variety of languages, jurisdictions, etc. So rather than doing that, rather than asking for 2 years of tax returns or 3 years of bank statements or whatever it may be, what we do is we have an income letter. If you are self-employed, that income letter is coming from your accountant. If you are employed, it comes from your employer, needs to be on the letterhead. We actually have a template for this, which makes it quite simple. But this letter just merely needs to state your last 2 years of income and your current year-to-date income. That is sufficient in lieu of tax returns. So it makes it very uniform regardless of which country you're in. Again, no US credit is required. Loan amounts as low as $150,000. And with this program, you can get up to 75% financing if you're a foreign national. How this works is it needs to meet, which most countries have very similar, it needs to meet a debt to income ratio. So in this particular case, it needs to be 47% or below of your gross personal income. So whatever is written on that letter, it needs to be stated in gross personal income, so pre-tax income. As long as your mortgage payment, taxes, and insurance are 47% below that, then the loan qualifies. As an example, $10,000, mortgage payment is $4,700, the loan qualifies. This is a very popular loan program for high net worth clients. We tend to do a lot of business for clients that have very complex and complicated tax returns, multiple jurisdictions, multiple companies, etc. If we again were to go through this in order to get them to qualify, it gets not only very difficult and challenging for the underwriting, it becomes very frustrating for the borrower themselves. So what we have is a program where all we're going to look at is 2 months of their liquid assets. Liquid assets are stocks, bonds, could be crypto, cash in the bank, etc. We're going to take a 2-month average of that, and then we'll divide it by the fixed period of the loan. I have an example of it in the next slide. But what this does is it allows you to qualify for a loan that could be quite significant without having to go through the process of compiling all of these tax returns, etc. It's a very simple, straightforward process. The great thing about this is the assets that you're showing are not being pledged. Only the property is being pledged. So there is no encumbrance on these assets. It makes it absolutely a fantastic way to qualify if you're a high net worth client. Again, we will need to make sure that it qualifies. But if you have an example on here, if you have a 2-month average of a portfolio, say $5 million, you have a fixed term of the loan of say 60 months or 5 years. That gives you an average income of $83,333. Say you're buying a very large property and you have an $80,000 mortgage, it qualifies. So again, very straightforward, very simple, allows high net worth clients to qualify for very large mortgages. These are minimum 3 million up to 100 million in a very straightforward, simple process. So if you're a US expat, we try to make it look and feel exactly as if you were living and working in the US and walking into your local bank. So this is the only loan program where we would require tax returns. You're going to provide your 2 years of US tax returns. You're going to qualify for the same process as it would be in the US, assuming whatever your credit score is basically determines what rate and what loan to value you would be able to qualify for. On average, normally we can get up to 80% financing, and the rates are identical to what you could see online for local borrowing. So how this works, again, is it has to meet the proper debt to income ratio, which for these programs is 47%. So again, if you have income of $10,000, your mortgage payment, taxes, insurance, $4,700, the loan qualifies. It's that simple. This is quite appropriate, especially for what we're doing today with George. This is the AM Student Plus loan. Previously, if you were going to buy a property for your child to attend university, you would have to buy it as a second home, meaning that you would have to qualify based on your debt in your home country and the debt on the property in the US, which sometimes, depending on what you're showing for serviceability, makes it very challenging. This new loan program is absolutely fantastic because it qualifies very similar to the Investor Plus loan. You do not have to show personal income. What we will do is see what the rental income would be for the property, and we would use that as the income to qualify, even though the property will be technically rented to your child to attend school. So absolutely a fantastic way to qualify for this program. Brand new. Again, you can get up to 75% financing as a foreign national. How it qualifies, very similar to the other program. If we find that the gross rental income from the analysis is $2,400 as an example, and the mortgage payment insurance are the same, the loan qualifies. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can scan our QR code and you can reach out to us later. That gives you the contact for not only us, but also gives you the contact for George as well. So what we'll do is we will go into the questions and answers. And what I will do, George, is I will ask the questions, and if it is relevant to me, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'll ask you to answer it. So, very first question, which is for you, is do you offer EB1A, EB2 support services?
Yes, so the EB1A is it's like the O1 visa. It's like a step above the O1 visa. It's a green card option for people with extraordinary ability. So yes. EB2, yes. Typically for our individual clients, we see that in the context of something called a national interest waiver. Depending on where the client is from, we might want to avoid EB2 just because there's significant backlogs. There's also backlogs in EB1A. But yes, we work, any type of green card option, any type of non-immigrant visa option, we work with clients on those.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. Very interesting. Do published authors qualify for an O1 talent visa to move to the U.S.?
Can be. If they are, self-published or, if they have like a real publisher who's published their work, that's always better. But yeah, we have a lot of authors. And again, we look to a lot of different types of evidence to bolster our O1 visas, and publishing something, whether it be fiction, nonfiction, is definitely a major criteria, especially if it's been cited or, reviewed, or, if there's been more media about that publication. That's great.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, next question. Can E2 and L1 visa holders bring their dependents to the U.S.? What rights do these dependents have in terms of work and study?
Yes, so under U.S. immigration law, children who are unmarried and under the age of 21 qualify as dependents, not 18, but 21. And spouses also qualify as dependents. So those are the individuals who qualify as family members, not parents, not brothers and sisters, just spouses and kids unmarried under the age of 21. For the E2 and L1s, spouses can work in the US wherever they want with a social security number. You can work wherever you want. You can set up your own thing. You can work for an employer, freelance, doesn't matter. And spouses can also study. Children unmarried under the age of 21 are limited to studying only. They don't get work authorization. They can only study. So spouses can do pretty much whatever they want. Kids are limited to study.
Okay. So on that note, you had mentioned only direct family members. What visa would allow parents to come over, or cousins, or whatever it may be? Or is that even possible?
No, it's not possible. So, parents can apply for a B1, B2 visa, if their child is going to have a baby in the U.S. or, they're just renewing their visa, that's fine. But until an individual becomes a U.S. citizen, they can't petition for their parents for a green card. And there's no, if you have an E2 visa, there's no real direct path for you to say, well, I want my mom and dad to, be able to come visit. It doesn't work like that. You're strictly limited to your spouse and your kids who are unmarried under the age of 21 until you become a citizen. Then you can petition for your parents and they can access a green card very, very quickly. But obviously that's a longer term plan for clients.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Which countries currently have a treaty with the U.S. that allows their nationals to apply for an E2 visa? Are there any recent additions or removals?
Additions or removals would be Ecuador and Bolivia. At one point, there was a treaty between Iran and the United States. Obviously, that's not in effect. Recent additions would be Portugal, Israel. So Portugal and Israel now have E2, access to E2 visas with the U.S. One thing that clients ask about a lot is if they if you become a citizen of Portugal or you become a citizen of, Turkey has an E2 treaty with the US, can you then access the E2 visa? And that used to be the case up until March of last year, or maybe a little earlier, like January, February last year. So there was a change in the law that said that if you obtain, say, a Portuguese passport or a Turkish passport or a Grenadian passport through investment, you make an investment in Grenada or you make an investment in Turkey, you get a passport. If that's the case, then you have to wait 3 years and you have to demonstrate that your primary domicile is that country before you can apply for an E2 visa. So that was an important change. And then there's, a list of countries that have access to an E2 visa. You can find it pretty easily by giving a little Google. But typically it tends to be most of Western Europe, Japan, South Korea are the big countries in Asia. Pakistan has an E2 treaty with the US. Turkey has an E2 treaty with the US. Some of the smaller countries, in Eurasia have access to E2 visas as well.
Okay, perfect. Next question. E2 visa a better option for a British author or O1 if the final intent is to have residency and do a PhD at a university?
If the final intent is to have a green card,
I think the final intent, according to here, is to do a PhD at a university or residency, I guess.
Would need to look at the particular. There's no way that anyone is going to say, "Oh, you're a British author, and you want to do a PhD. Here's the visa for you." Like, you're going to need to look at what the E2 is, what you're investing into. Is there any realistic possibility that you could convert that into either an EB1C or an EB5? Those are the green card options. If you're on a trajectory to continue in the same line of work that you potentially qualify for an O1, you might be able to step from an O1 to the EB1A that the first person asked a question about. So I would tend to say maybe an O1 and look at an EB1A, but it depends on the particulars of the investment for the E2, and then what it is that this person is, what field they're publishing in. Are they going to continue to publish in that same field, things like that.
Okay. For an L1A, what constitutes full-time employment? I'm an executive director of my company with plans to expand to the United States.
What constitutes full-time employment? It's 35 plus hours a week. They're not the USCIS isn't so much concerned with full-time employment. I don't know if the question is about like the 1 year, if you qualify for the 1 year of employment, or if it's more like, how many hours a week do I need to work? For the 1 year of employment, if you just started 1 year ago and spent time in the US doing like business development or meetings or conferences or whatever, you have to subtract those days from your 1 year. So for the 1 year of employment, we really do look at, we count the days that you have been working as an executive or a manager outside the US. But if you're an executive director of a company and you plan to expand to the US, you're talking about something called a new office L1. And there are some very particular requirements for that visa that include, getting physical office space in the US, drafting a business plan, demonstrating that a sufficient investment will be made to really get the business up and running, hiring employees within that first year. So those can be tough visa filings, but those are fun. They're challenging. So they can be fun in that regard.
Okay. And on that note, is there a minimum time required that they have to spend in the US on any of these visas? Like, is it 180 days or is it less, or does that impact it?
If you have a green card, that's when things like number of days in the US, not so much like cumulative number of days in the US, it's more the inverse. Like, how many days are you spending outside the US in a single stretch? But there's never, for any visa, there's never any requirement that you spend at least 180 days per year in the US. especially for the E2 or L1 visas or student visas, O1, like a visa, when you think about it, it's like a visa, not a green card, there's no hard physical presence requirement. We talk about a green card. If you're going to spend more than a year outside the US in any one stretch, you need to talk to your attorney, maybe apply for something called a re-entry permit, and maybe look at, okay, over the long term, what are we going to do to mitigate any sort of negative effects that your travel can have on your US, green card, especially when you're going to the airport. That's where it's going to be high risk. If you're consistently spending, you're outside the US for a year at a time, you come back in for 2 weeks, you leave again for a year, you come back in for 2 weeks, eventually you're going to have some issue in the airport. And so you want to look at, okay, what ties do you have to the US? When is your travel schedule going to change? Do you need to apply for a re-entry permit, etc.?
Okay. So EB1A or O1 possible for scientists?
Yeah. That's easy. Yes.
Okay. And I think actually this is sort of covering what I just said, but is there a minimum amount of time each year I should spend in the US with an E2 visa? Can I have residence abroad and travel regularly between the US to run a business?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the great things about the E2. Super flexible. Maybe you have a trusted person in the US who's sort of overseeing the day-to-day, and you're coming in and out. Works like a charm.
Okay, perfect. Next question. Hi, I have a couple questions. Is there any criteria for an L1 visa in terms of company turnover? And second question, any specific investment criteria for an E2? And is it for the entire family? And third, is an F4 easier than an F1?
Okay, so an F4 is a dependent. An F4 is if you're the spouse or child under the age of 21 of a person who's studying full-time in the US. So I guess that's easier because you're not studying. But you can't work. You can study, but you can't really do anything. You can work, but you can't work. So if it's easier than an F1, the question doesn't really make a ton of sense, but I'll just say yes, because you don't have to prove that you're enrolled in a full course of study, but your spouse or your parent does. So, and then what the other two were?
Is there any criteria for an L1 visa in terms of company turnover? And any specific investment criteria for an E2 for the entire family?
No. So the E2, we typically say, hey, if you're going to make an investment of between $150,000 and $250,000, that's what we like to see. You're just going to take that question off the table for the consular officer who's reviewing the file. But that's not by law. That's just by experience what we tend to see. If it's a small business, $150,000 to $250,000 investment. For L1 visas, in terms of turnover, there's no requirement. The L1 visa, they can be very, very difficult to obtain. And so you really just want to demonstrate that you have employees that are reporting to you, generally speaking, to qualify for an L1 visa. So it's not just you, in the copier and the coffee machine, but you have, employees who are carrying out substantive duties that you're overseeing. That's what you want to demonstrate in the O1 context, rather than, high gross, earnings or net or whatever it is. That's helpful, but really they want to see that in the org chart, you've got 4 people under you, or at least I would say 2 to 4 employees, reporting to you.
Okay. Next question, is immigration requirement the same for Puerto Rico? Interesting question. There's actually a follow-up. And will you qualify for 4% tax? I'm not sure what that means, but.
Me neither, so I'm just going to say I don't understand the question. And then, so Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, and so U.S. territories are considered, they're subject to the same federal laws U.S. immigration law is federal, so it doesn't vary by state to state or territory to territory. It's all the same. And so the answer is yes, the requirements are the same for Puerto Rico.
And like what you just stated about the laws of federal, meaning that regardless if you're an attorney in Washington, D.C., somebody wants to move to Boston or to Los Angeles or whatever, you're still able to help them, even though your office is, a DC registered office.
Yeah, that's right. So exactly. If you're going to Hawaii or Maine, the law is the same. Most of our clients are outside the U.S. anyways. So it's the same in all 50 states and U.S. territories.
Next question is, how can we contact you? And there will be a contact form at the end, which you can screenshot. There will also be a video that is sent out to everybody that is what you're watching now, but an edited version, which will have the contacts for myself and also George. But George, if you want to just maybe give out your phone number, your email, maybe something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my email is george@gainey.lawgroup.com. You can also just Google Gainey Law Group and, we have a contact thing. And then phone is +1 202 650 7415. So it's +1 202 650 7415.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question is for me. Can you only apply for a variable loan without fixed and early repay? You can apply for both variable or fixed. It's entirely up to you on what your requirements are and what your goals are for the investment. Normally, investment loans have at least a 3-year prepayment penalty. So you certainly can pay it off early before the 3 years is over, but there normally is an interest requirement that needs to be met over that 3-year term. After the 3-year period, there is no penalties and you can pay it off or down at will. So it really just depends on your goals. And I think if you speak to one of our loan officers, they can probably give you the options and see which one actually works best for you. Next question is for myself as well. How can a foreign LLC buy a property using a mortgage? Not technically. You can buy a property as a foreign national. You have to be an individual, but you can hold the property title for a variety of reasons in a U.S. LLC. I know a lot of people would like to use like a foreign offshore blocker, whether it's a BVI company, et cetera. It makes, as long as there's a line directly to the UBO, it may be possible. And again, it's something that you might want to speak to an individual loan officer about. Next question is for myself. Hi, Robert. If my spouse and I are retired, would we still be able to qualify for a mortgage? Yeah, absolutely. You probably may not qualify using your income to qualify, but you can use the cash flow loan, which goes off of only the rental income of the property. And this is actually a perfect loan for somebody that's retired or maybe even self-employed that maybe is not showing their true serviceability of debt. Next question. Is there any limit to the type of property that investors can purchase, i.e. can it only be single family? No, absolutely. It can be a variety of condos, townhouses. It can be up to 1 to 4 units. So it can be a duplex or it could be a fourplex. They all qualify under these loan programs. So it's very flexible and very easy as long as it's a residential property and below 4 units. Next question, could we have Mr. Gainey's email address so I can book a session? Absolutely. George, if you want to throw that out there, but it also will be at the end of the video. But if you want to talk to him prior to that.
Yeah. Yep. It's George@GaineyLawGroup.com.
Okay, next question. I'm not sure if this is for myself or for George, but for us, the question is, do you have representation in Singapore? And we do have an office in Singapore, so we can either meet with you in person or speak with you in your time zone. For George, I know how I contacted him was a referral from a very large entity here in Singapore. So I know he is in Singapore. He travels here often. But George, maybe you can kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, I don't have a representative office in Singapore, but we have lots of clients in Singapore and lots of people we work with and collaborate with in Singapore. And so we tend to visit, a couple times a year, and always happy to sit down with clients and meet in person. It's very personal. So meeting face to face with clients helps. And, when they see that you're suffering the same jet lag that they suffer when they go to the US, there's a little empathy factor there. So, always happy to visit, and always happy to jump on, Zoom calls and try to make, the time zone difference. It's not too brutal.
Excellent. Okay, next question. Is it possible for American mortgages to guide me to the best loan program for my situation? I'm not sure which would suit me best. Absolutely. So again, we have loan officers around the world. 100% of their clients are clients like yourself, living and working abroad, purchasing or refinancing a property in the US. There are a variety of loan programs, even more than what we discussed in this webinar. So they are very experienced, and based on your requirements for a variety of ways, they will go over the loan programs that best suit you, and then you can choose and see which one makes sense. What is the interest rate range? It really varies on many factors. Obviously, if you're a US citizen, you're going to be paying the rates that US citizens are paying. If you're a foreign national, the rates are slightly above that. Obviously there's a risk profile, but it's not much higher. And then again, it's LTV based. So the higher the loan to value, the higher the interest rate will be. But always keep in mind, and we say this like many, many times, you can never time an interest rate. We say date the rate, marry the property. The only thing that you can time is when you find the perfect property to buy. The great thing about now is people are not bidding over what the property values are. So although interest rates may be a little bit higher, the opportunity you have as an investor or a buyer is absolutely the perfect time. And when rates go down, it's just simply a matter of refinancing if it makes sense. Next question, I believe this is you, George. What countries have treaties with the US?
Yeah, so again, it's most of Western Europe, Latin America, Kazakhstan, and Japan, Korea from Asia. Those are the main countries. It's not. Again, these are clauses that appear in trade-based treaties between the U.S. and another country. So it's not like all of a sudden a new country will just be added to the list. It's part of a very complicated, long negotiation between the U.S. and whatever other country. So it takes a really long time for a country who isn't on this list to have access to an E2 visa. But big countries that don't have access are India, China. Those are the two really big countries, I think, where there might otherwise be a lot of that don't unfortunately have access to the E2 visas in the United States. So that's where we start looking at O1 visas or maybe L1 visas, for individuals who are Chinese or Indian passport holders.
Next question. This would be for me. I'm not a U.S. citizen. Do I need to get pre-approved before, and how long would it take? The most important thing, especially if you're starting to look at investing in the U.S. or you have been investing in the U.S., is to get pre-approved for a loan and actually get issued a letter. What that letter states is that you have been approved. So when you put an offer in for a property, and this is for US citizens living in the US, and it's also for investors, the seller's side wants to see that you've already gone through the process and you've been approved for a loan. So it normally takes about 72 hours, possibly even less, once you submit your paperwork. And I think you'll find the paperwork for these loan programs are much more straightforward and probably simpler than applying for a loan in your home country. But once you have that letter, it's pretty good for basically an extended period of time, unless your financial situation changes or the loan programs, for whatever reason, are discontinued. Next question. I guess is asking if the UK has a treaty.
Yes, it does. There's some weird, depending on where you're applying for the visa, there might be some additional residency requirements. If you're applying in London, the US consulate in London wants to see that you are and have been a resident of the UK for at least the past year. They have very specific documents that you take with you. If you're applying a different consulate, they might not apply that requirement, but word to lies if you're applying.
Okay. Next question. I'm a UK citizen, UAE resident, and a UAE tax resident. My wife is American and lives with me around the world. I want to visit for extended periods of time to the US, but I do not want to enter their tax system. Will an investment visa help with this? And if I have to be registered for tax, can I qualify for a PR 4%?
So I think the individual is asking about Puerto Rico there.
I must be.
Yeah. So if you have an E2 visa, you don't automatically become, if you're a UK citizen, you can obtain an E2 visa because the UK has an E2, a treaty that provides for E2 visas with the US. I think it might be the oldest one. And that visa would allow you to spend extended periods of time in the US. And if you talk to your tax advisor and you count your days appropriately, you won't become a US resident for income tax purposes. And even if you were, I'm assuming, depending on what your tax advisor says, maybe you could, qualify as a resident of Puerto Rico and pay less tax in that manner. But long story short, yes, an E2 visa would be a good option if your goal is to, spend longer periods of time in the U.S. without triggering U.S. Residency for income taxes.
Well, I'm curious, just because of that question. What is a 4% tax? Are you familiar with what that is?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I'd like to qualify for that too, as a U.S. citizen. Next question. My wife is a U.S. citizen, but hasn't lived there ever for more than 6 months. Can her daughter qualify for a Section 320 child? She was born in Australia and her biological dad is estranged. You want me to read again?
Yeah, I'll just say that there's the laws that apply to children born abroad to U.S. citizens who can qualify for U.S. citizenship has changed many times. And so there's a chart that, there's like a cheat sheet that we use. So I'd have to pull to accurately answer whether in that particular scenario, that fact pattern, I'd have to pull that up. I don't have it handy, but suffice to say that there are rules. If a child is born to a U.S. citizen abroad, there are certain rules as to how much time that U.S. citizen parent must have spent inside the United States before turning 18, I believe. There's a period of time. It doesn't necessarily say you have to have spent more than 6 months at any one time, which is what I think that person said. But we do look at cumulatively how many days during a certain period of that person's life did they spend inside the United States. So right off the bat, it's not crystal clear, but those are fun cases.
Okay. Can an E2 visa be the pathway to a green card later down the road?
Very technical, very complicated, but yeah.
Okay. Is there a visa to buy real estate and lease for the income? So for us, as long as you're able to enter the U.S., there's no requirement to have any type of extra visa. The only requirement would be that you could travel back and forth to the U.S. You're not from a sanctioned country, or for one reason or another, you're not able to obtain travel visas. So to buy a U.S. property, no visa in theory is required. Next question. Puerto Rico has a 4% tax. Is that just for U.S. citizens or immigrants too? Back to that 4% question.
I don't know. I'm not a Puerto Rico tax advisor or specialist. So I would say, we always work with, CPAs or U.S. tax attorneys. So I would say speak with your Puerto Rican.
Yeah, I think probably the likeliest thing would be to reach out to a U.S. CPA that is based in Puerto Rico. They could probably answer that question.
Yeah, I know. I've heard there have been U.S. citizens who have relocated to Puerto Rico, so this isn't just coming out of nowhere. But I just don't know enough about it.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to look into that myself. Actually.
Yeah.
Next question: what are the requirements for an EB2 NIW? Is it for a green card, and how long does it take?
It is a green card, and NIW stands for National Interest Waiver. It takes today. It'll probably take about 3 years. And the requirements are, you have to be doing something in the U.S. that has substantial intrinsic merit. It has to be something that's going to positively affect the U.S. at a national scale. And you have to show that you're sort of well positioned to do this thing in the U.S. You can self-petition. It can be very technical. But yes, we work on NIWs all the time because of a change in something called the Visa Bulletin that happened over the past couple of months. These are taking longer to, it's going to take longer to get your green card through an EB2 NIW.
Okay. Next question. If I'm looking to invest in a commercial building in the U.S., would I be able to qualify for an EB5 and a commercial mortgage? I understand there is a minimum investment amount to qualify for an EB5.
Yeah, so the minimum investment amount is $800,000. Investing into a currently constructed commercial property in the U.S. is not going to qualify you for EB5. There's also a job creation element. And if you're looking to make an investment in a passive way, in a passive type fund type structure, it's going to have to be new construction.
So in order to, I guess, to meet the job requirement, that would be the.
Exactly. So it's passive, meaning that, you count indirect jobs that have been created. You don't go out to the work site and count, how many hard hats are out there. But if you're just investing into a commercial building, that's not going to generate, it'll generate maybe a couple of jobs. It's not going to generate the 10 jobs necessary to qualify for EB5.
And I know we've had this question come up actually a lot and correct me if I'm wrong, George, but Yeah, in some countries in Europe, you are able to obtain a mortgage, which also allows for, a visa, residency. But in the U.S., it has to be a pure investment. It's not, you're not able to mortgage or to borrow any of that $800,000 in order to qualify
Well, you can borrow
within the U.S.
again.
on a mortgage property. I mean,
Oh no,
so you can't buy an $800,000 property and get a $400,000 mortgage to qualify.
No, that's not the way that it works. Yeah, I know that in European residency programs, it's a different animal. In the U.S., no. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. You can make an investment using funds that you've borrowed pursuant to a loan that's secured by assets that you own, but you can't mortgage a property in the U.S. and thereby just on the basis of that qualify for EB-5.
Yeah, makes sense. Next question is, what are the current rates for a rental-only qualification mortgage? Again, it's going to be LTV driven, but you're probably going to be around the 8% range. But if you look at where rates are now, that's pretty much on the money for where you're at. But also keep in mind, regardless of your age, you can get a 30-year amortization. And again, we have that program that's a 10-year fixed interest servicing only. So you're only paying the interest, which depending on the property size could make a very significant difference in the payment. So there's a variety of ways to qualify depending on which way, what your goals are. Does Australia have a treaty?
Yes, an E2 treaty, yes.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. Can I use a B1, B2 visa to get a mortgage? Also, is it possible to change from a B visa to EB-5 or to L1? So I guess you can answer that, and then I'll go into the mortgage.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is. So if you're inside the U.S. with a non-immigrant visa, it's possible to change to an EB-5 or to L1. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay. And then on the mortgage side, again, there is no requirement unless you're buying a property for owner occupied. You would have to be able to show that you're living and working in the U.S. and can afford the mortgage. But if it's purely for an investment, again, there's no per se visa required. You just need to be able to, prove that you can travel, to and from the U.S. Without any restrictions. Okay, so the person that asked about the 4% Puerto Rico thing is explaining why. So I'll just kind of skip over that. I meant to ask if leasing houses is considered a business if we had 10 units, and what visa can I apply for if I'm an Australian citizen?
Yeah, so that might work for an E2 visa. If you have lots of units and you have maybe like an in-house property manager that you've hired and bookkeeper / accountant, that might work for an E2 visa. If you just buy a single family home and you rent it out, that's not going to work for E2 visa purposes. It needs to be an active business that's actually doing something. It's providing some good or service. You've got a couple people on payroll.
So just to kind of clarify for myself or other people, if you own multiple properties, so in this example, he said 10, that could potentially qualify you for what type of visa?
An E2.
Or an E2, okay.
Yeah. It could be an L1 as well, depending on how many employees you're going to hire. But just right off the bat, I would say usually E2.
Okay. Next question would be for me. Can you offer a second position mortgage? Unfortunately, we do not have any second mortgages for foreign nationals or expats. We've tried in the past to be able to get these. Unfortunately, just not available. Next question, can a mortgage be in the U.S. LLC, which is owned by a foreign LLC? I believe you're talking about an offshore blocker. Most likely not, because there's no direct line to the UBO. I realize why people do it for various tax reasons and protection and so forth, but there has to be, because these are recourse loans, there has to be a technical borrower for this. But again, you can have a U.S. LLC as the owner of the property for a variety of reasons. Next question. I just covered it. So if the property is owned by U.S. LLC, which is in return owned by UAE LLC, that would be a blocker. So unfortunately, wouldn't be allowed. So that was a lot of questions. That was 43 questions. George, thank you for your time, and thank you everybody for stayed on throughout the webinar. We really appreciate your time and your business. Again, this will be sent out to everybody with a recorded session that will not only cover again what we discussed, but we'll have our contacts for American Mortgages and George's contact for the immigration information. Please feel free to reach out to George directly. Again, thank you everybody. And George, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for spending time with us. Enjoy the rest of your holiday in Spain.
Thank you.
And safe travels back to America. Okay, thank you everybody.
Thanks, Robert. Bye.